Priyanka, first of all, thank you so much for doing this. Much like you, we are also very new to all of this. Okay, so I think one of the most important questions that all of us have is Dream 11 is a very non-trivial product, right? What is typically going on at the design team in such a product? How crazy does it get during, let's say, a World Cup final?
Yeah, so Dream 11 has like over 200 million users, and it is a very, although it's like all sports, it is still very cricket first, given that cricket is like religion in India. So during IPL and World Cup, it gets really crazy, but it's not crazy during it, it's crazy before it. So once we enter like December, that's when things start to get crazy. People go on their breaks, come back, and then you just hit the ground running. In fact, for a lot of our leadership team, there is an embargo on taking leaves right before the IPL and all of that because there's just so much going on and you kind of have to lead by example, so you can't be gone, so you have to be there. The design team is generally working very closely with the product team at that point, churning out a lot of features for IPL specifically or World Cup because these events are planned and they aren't like surprise events. We have a calendar, so we kind of start thinking like now we're thinking about what are the things we want to ship for IPL. And one of the biggest things this time we're going to do is ship a new design, like a redesign.
When is this happening?
It's going to be 6 more months before it's out.
Can you tell us anything about it?
Dream 11 is one of the first fantasy sports apps, right? So what has happened is that every other app has now looks like Dream 11. Now everything looks the same. So what we're trying to do is just move away from that and create our own identity. That's one. Second is also Dream 11 today is very, very cricket first. But really the vision of Dream 11 and Dream Sports, which is the parent company, is to make sports better and to become like the most loved fantasy sports app for all sports, for Indian fans. So we're trying to make our app a lot more sports agnostic. So right now, if you look at the app, the home page of the app is basically a cricket filter. So we're trying to say, no, our home page is going to be a home, and then you can actually choose the sport you're interested in. So we are working on this whole sort of transformation at this time. But at the same time, because we have so many users, we're trying to keep the app familiar. So one of the principles we are using is fresh but familiar kind of an approach. So we spent a few months on redesigning it, and now it's in development. That's what's going to come, and a bunch of visual changes to the app. So we're really excited, and we are really taking this as a bold bet. So there is no incremental small things that we are testing on its own. Because I'll tell you what, we tried it. We tried it a few months back. We said, let's redesign one component and let's test it out and see how it does. And it fared very, very badly. And a lot of that is because it's like saying, I'm going to redecorate my home and I have this idea of changing all my furniture. Okay, but I'm just going to get one piece and put it with my old furniture, and it's just not going to work. Like it, and that's exactly what happened. You're basically taking a new design, new visual style, putting it in the old system. It just doesn't work. So we decided as a team to just take this as like a big bet and just go all in with a redesign and learn from it and iterate as we, kind of expose it to more and more users.
How do you go about deciding what to launch, how it should be, how should the experience be? What is the balance of research and intuition, let's say, from a craft perspective?
Yeah, see, it's a really good question, right? So I think for designers, your intuition builds up as you become more experienced. So you don't need research for every little thing. And I'm more in the camp of start with intuition, and then you can always do some usability testing for comprehension. But you cannot go and ask a user, what do you want? You'll never get that answer. Like if you asked a user, do you want a fantasy sports cricket app? They would have said, what is that? Who knows?
So the
Who
Ford and
cares?
Houses situation.
Yeah, exactly that, right? So I think you have to like balance that from a place of conviction and being okay with subjectivity. I think sometimes we really fear subjectivity because like something like a redesign, right, is not the most tangible thing to measure. Because one of the questions we get a lot from our data team is how will you attribute that everything in the design works? And that is just like a bad way to think about it. You don't do that.
More of a combination of
You look at the combination of things and say, hey, is this new redesign like helping us move certain, like what are your goals, right? You want people to maybe play more sports. Is that happening? You know, if it's not happening, then try to understand why it's not happening. So that's how we are approaching it. We are not over-indexing on research because the other thing that happens with research is in a new design, you're not giving the user real content unless you're creating a real prototype, right? So when you're not giving them real content, people don't comprehend things that well.
Absolutely.
Because it's not personalized to them, and Dream 11 is fairly personalized to your behaviors. So you get some directional insight, but you don't really get that much. So we did this. We constantly went because the design team is just like, oh, we should just check, fine, we can do it. But honestly, at the end of the day, the design hasn't changed a lot from what started from intuition to what we are actually building.
Right. It's an interesting point you make about prototyping, right? How high fidelity can you go that you're actually convinced that this is, giving a good modicum of truth to me as opposed to, all the assumptions that I'm making? Besides, like going to users with Figma prototypes with all the latency that Figma has, that's not really a real product. How do you go about solving something like that before launching something?
Yeah, see, this is a very good question. And to be honest, I think it really depends on what you're trying to learn from the prototype, right? Like if you're just trying to get, sometimes we'll do things that affect payments. So we test those out. In that, a lot of the testing is just the text, the comprehension. And for that, you don't even need a prototype. It's fine. But if you're going to test flows and all of that, we still use Figma. I would like for us to not use Figma so much for prototyping. So when I was at WhatsApp and Meta, we used a tool called Origami, which is extremely complicated, but
Super
absolutely the best there is in the world, in my opinion, We used to even prototype back in the day. We used to prototype directly in Swift. I used to prototype directly in Swift.
Yeah, well, Swift is actually very friendly.
Yeah, because the playground makes it very friendly to do it. I don't think we are there yet when it comes to design here. Like we are still very much in like the quick prototypes. So I think it's okay. I think it's just a matter of making sure you have clarity on what you want to learn and does your prototype support that. So if you're trying to like get feedback on an animation, which I actually hope no one does. I hope we use more of our creative judgment and do that. But anyway, if you're trying to get feedback on an animation, that's going to be a very tricky one to get from Figma and all of that. It'd be a lot better using actually a dev build. So if you work with engineers, you have good relationships with engineers, and you're
Just sit
able
down
to...
and make it happen, basically.
Yeah, just tell them, hey, just give me like a hacky prototype. I just want to test it. That's actually the best.
Yeah, that's actually pretty good. I mean, getting an actual prototype means getting an actual product, right? It could have a little bit of a dummy data, but it is still as good as the real thing. How is the design team set up in Dream 11? How big is it? What are the levels?
Yeah, so the design team at Dream 11 is pretty big. It's about 56 people. It includes product designers, so that's your UX, UI designers. It has a research team, there is graphics, illustration, and also content design. Now that's a part of it. So yeah, that's like about the size. Level-wise, we usually start, like we don't really do a lot of campus hiring. It's usually L2 plus. So L2 is your first line industry hire with like 4 years of experience or so. And then it moves up all the way to my level. So we have like L2, L3, L4, L5 plus is like your management starts at L5. But what we've done is we've actually created 2 separate tracks. One is an IC track and a managerial track. The IC track goes all the way to L6, which is our AVP level. We might even take it further, but right now we are at L6. And the reason we created the 2 tracks is that not everyone will be a good manager. And not everyone needs to become a manager. So when I came here, we actually had only up to L4, you can be an IC, then you had to become like a manager. But then you just create a top-heavy team, which doesn't really mean anything. And then what about people who don't want to be managers? They don't have a path forward. Then they feel compelled. So what we did is we created these two separate tracks, and we made sure the compensation is exactly the same. So it's not like managers are more senior than ICs. And what we say is it's just a choice. You can, in fact, I have two designers, one director and an AVP, who have become ICs because they felt that was their strength and not managing. So their compensation doesn't change, nothing, none of that happens. It's treated very equally across the board. And we also coach the managers to not be bosses and be more supportive. Like, to empower their teams and support them and help them out. But also like zoom in and zoom out. So be in the details of the execution while having all your dots connected at the top.
At various levels in various orgs, as people level up, they stop being hands-on in design. Are you hands-on design today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've never stopped being hands-on on design. So I think for me, it's like blasphemy, man, to not design, right? So I see myself as a designer first, period. Everything else is after that. So,
You take the IC track.
so I'll tell you, it's a funny story. When I was leaving WhatsApp, I gave 8 months notice because I was moving to India. I told them, see, I'm going to leave, so you have to find someone to take my position. So the agreement I had with my manager was that in 2 months we'll find someone who will backfill me, and then 6 months I'll do IC work. Okay, so I said I will convert to an IC track, and they were like, perfect, let's do that. It took 8 months to find my backfill, and I got to do 2 weeks of IC work, but I still did IC work and I left. So I've always kept one project that I do IC work on. At Dream 11, I haven't found that yet because Dream 11 just has different challenges. But what I do here is every evening I set up an hour that is just open on my calendar. And I invite all the designers. I'm like, whoever wants feedback or wants to discuss or brainstorm anything, that is the time. And it is like the best hour of my day.
So how big is this brainstorming session? Does it happen every day?
So I set it up every day. I'm like, and it's basically an open sort of an hour for anyone to come and talk to me about anything. So like, if you want to discuss a design, if you want to discuss an illustration or animation, whatever it is, or you want quick feedback, we just sit at my desk and do
It's
it.
like a sacrosanct period every day.
Yes.
That's very nice. Just a quick, you mentioned about research, right? How does your design team actually do research? Like, do they go on ground and talk to your customers? Do you use products? How do you go about that?
So it's two things, right? One is benchmarking, which is just your understanding of the competitors and all of
Secondary
that.
research, basically.
Yeah, just sort of like getting a sense of what kind of products are out there, what are the products that your user base is also using, so kind of getting a sense of that. The other is like your usability testing kind of a thing. So I think with research, you have to be very clear on what is it that you want to learn from it.
Sure.
So what used to happen actually when I started at Dream 11 is that the research team would be very, very busy doing a lot of research. And what I learned is that actually the designers would just say, I've made this design and I want to research this.
Yeah.
Without really having a sense of what is it that they want to learn.
Yeah.
So do the research team stop doing this kind of research? Tell them to first figure out what is it that they want to learn. Because then you can keep your research very focused.
Yeah.
But honestly, like the way our research team operates now is usability testing is just one component of it. It's not the thing. They spend a lot more time on strategic research, thinking about what are the opportunities or areas that are untapped? What are the problems that are coming up that we are not addressing yet? So they're doing a lot more strategic research, and we created big budgets for those so they can actually, talk to users all the time. And so I'll give you another thing like women, right? Women is a big demographic that Dream 11 doesn't tap into that much. So we're trying to understand more about their behaviors and what is it that keeps them or from playing, or like or do they like sports, like, and who are those kind of people. So I would rather have our research team spend more time on these things, because I'll tell you the other thing with design research, right? We are not, like, a lot of us are building apps, I'm assuming, or websites. These it's been a while, like it's not a new thing anymore. For any idea you think of, there is an app. the OEMs and your operating systems have really, sort of evolved. Like Google has material design guidelines, Apple has HIG. There's so much you can take from it. Like so many things are now more
It's very
standardized.
easy to make a good app.
Exactly. There's so many things more standardized. Like unless you're doing something that is really out of the box, which might throw off your users, sometimes you don't even need research.
Yeah.
So at WhatsApp, this is a very interesting thing. When I joined WhatsApp, we had no researchers, and it was already close to 1 billion users. Like there was zero research at WhatsApp. It was very much based on how is the operating system working, how do you navigate within that operating system, and how can WhatsApp plug into what is existing rather than creating new patterns for the heck of it.
That's interesting. So, since you mentioned the research being kind of a separate team, something that we also mull over a lot at Canvas is how do you create institutional knowledge inside a company? So, since you mentioned that there is like a proactive research happening in opportunities, does the team actually have like a docket of insights that they've been building over time, and do they share it with the team proactively?
Yeah, so they do that. We have this research wall or something in Notion where they share all these things, but it's one of those things that people don't actually go and it's like a pull and push mechanism, right? They don't actually go pull that information, you have to push it to them. So we do some sessions and things like that. But what I really like to do is we have this like for tech product and design, we have like a TPD group discuss that happens every few weeks. We always make sure research is there presenting something new that they have found. Then just yesterday itself, like, we had some new research insights on trust or whatever. We just got time with our CEO and we said, hey, here's what we're learning. So one of the things with research, I think it's always the thing that is questioned most with people that don't understand research is statistical significance. So I'll tell you what really changed this for us. When you look at data, you can say, like 1 million users, sort of have taken the survey, so it's statistically significant, right? But what are you getting from 6 people that you talk to? So we started doing these immersion trips.
Okay.
So our research team now regularly they take a group of 5 or 6 people. Usually it is someone from design, product, and data to different cities in the country for 2 days, and then they go to other users' homes.
Who is a typical user of Dreamweaver?
So there's a bunch, right? So you've got the sports fans who really come to Dreamer Level for like, hey, this enhances my sporting experience or my watching experience of let's say an IPL match, and I'm sitting with my friends and I want to compete with them, so I'm creating a team, And then you have those users who are like more coming in for the more aspirational value of like, oh man, like I like cricket, but I can actually use my knowledge to possibly win a life-changing amount. And then you have a small percentage of users who are like just coming in for that life-changing amount.
Interesting. Are there people who are trying to game the system?
Sure, like for example, there are people who will create multiple accounts. You're not technically supposed to, but they will just create it on their wife's name or someone else's name and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's just like fair play violations is what that's the only sort of.
Can you detect it in the back end?
Sometimes.
Talking about gaming the system, this is something that I personally want to understand. What does gamification mean in an app like Dream11? What is like your take on it generally?
Yeah, see, I think gamification is just such an overused term, it just really depends on how you. And to be honest, like, people have been doing it throughout history. It's not like a new thing. It just got a new coin term, which is like thrown out a lot. And I think Duolingo has been one of those apps that has really sort of prided itself on gamification. So see, at Dream 11, I think, see, one thing we have to understand about Dream 11, that it's not an online game. It's basically a second screen experience to a live sporting event. So the areas we actually, our gamification happens is more once the match starts, so in the leaderboard, where you're seeing, how you are doing against the people you're competing with. How do we make and how do we create those moments of delight in that? How do we create moments of winning? So the way we think of gamification is more from an engagement perspective. So I think there's a line between being gamified and gimmicky, right? So you don't want to be on the gimmicky side. You don't want to be frivolous.
It's a pretty fat line to be honest, but it is still confused.
Yeah, exactly. So I think sometimes like, oh, let's gamify this. Let's make this clickbaity. Like that is totally not gamification, right? So we try to like tread that line very carefully and make sure we are not on that gimmicky side of things. But at the same time, it's not frivolous.
Yeah.
So you can like we also have something called rewards, like which is some similar to your loyalty points.
Right.
That is a little more gamified. Like hey, like play more matches and earn so many more dream coins, and then you can use those dream coins to buy like a pass to a live match, for example. So it's like, how are you also connecting that entire journey? That's really important, and not just like bling and
This could probably get like in very tricky territory, especially for an app like Dream 11. Like you can't gamify to an extent that people are forced to play the game, like get obsessed with it. Do you have such controls in place?
yeah. So you actually because Dream 11 is not a game on its own. There is not much to do. Like there is no game to play. The only thing is you can join more contests of different matches. Now what we do is we based on your interests and your history, we show you the matches we think you like.
Right.
We might also show you matches of other sports we think you should maybe try. But that's about it. There is no, and then there's some amount of gamification that happens on things like what we call round lock, which is your match timeline.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like hey, we are adding 30 seconds, so you have 30 more seconds,
Oh.
or 30 minutes to the round lock. No, it's 30 seconds. Sorry, getting my things wrong here, but and then that gives you a little more time to join a match. So we do those kind of things,
Yeah, I mean-
but
That's nice.
yeah, so just giving the user more opportunity to join the matches and
Right.
things like that. But yeah, like I think honestly we can do better, YP. I actually think we haven't tapped into the gamification mindset that much yet. Especially when it comes to rewards and like we have like these bits and pieces like streaks and things like that, but they're just there. They are not well connected they are not in your journey that a
Yeah.
user is going through. So we are going to start looking at
It's a part of the evolution.
Yeah.
So, do you think having an app like Dream 11 and of course its competitors in the market makes it like more interesting for people to actually start investing into sports?
when you mean investing, are you I talk about
Personally, in
users or
terms of
like
time and money both, like an average person is investing their time and money into sports. Because you mentioned that Dream 11 is going in the direction of effectively becoming a custodian for sports in
Correct.
India, right?
yeah.
Is there like an interplay of dynamics between this behavior of having an app like this and people getting more invested in sports as a nation?
Yes. So it's really interesting. This was very interesting for me to understand that what we learned is the more people engaged with Dream 11, the better they enjoyed the sport because it was almost like they have little skin in the game. Like they really care about how Virat Kohli is going to play because
They have
he's
more
like the
content.
captain on their
Yeah.
captain of their fantasy team.
Uh-huh.
So that sports engagement increases. So that we have seen that sort of correlation.
Is this where Dream 11 is going, becoming like the custodian for most sports in India?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things Dream 11 is doing. Right? So Dream 11 is an entity of a larger parent company called Dream Sports. So Dream 11 is one app, which is your fantasy sports. But then we also have other platforms like FanCode, which is like sports content.
Right.
We have something called Dream Set Go, which is sports travel. It's a very interesting thing. So like if you want to like create a vacation around Wimbledon, you work with Dreams and Go, they will like create a whole package for you. Then you go watch the Wimbledon, you get the best seats, you stay in a nice hotel, whatever. Like, they create the sports experience for you. And then there's something called Dream Game Studios, which is creating more online sports gaming.
Oh,
Okay, so there's this whole thing, and then we also have a Dream Sports Foundation, which is actually focused on building up athletes for like the next Olympics and things.
investing into things basically.
So
right?
we're investing in the sports ecosystem as a whole. Dream 11 ends up being the most visible side of it because it's scaled and people use it so much.
So it goes from an online model of being sports tech to actual physical manifestation.
Yeah, it's the whole thing. So the vision really is to be like a full-on sports and sports tech company. And
Academy sort
really, yeah, so the vision is like make sports better. It's like a very lofty vision, but we are getting there like, slowly and steadily.
I think we should probably move on to something that everyone wants to know more about, which is WhatsApp.
Oh yeah.
So, how does one go about getting a job at WhatsApp back in 2017?
By begging for it. Okay, so, uh, so I used
Tell us more.
no, it's true. That's exactly what I did. So I was at Facebook. I was working on a product called Facebook Groups on a small team and all of
Groups.
that. Yes. Of course, I've been using WhatsApp, and I'd come to India on one of my regular trips, and I was just blown away by how much WhatsApp is penetrated in India
Yeah.
for everything. Like I went to the bank, and the banker lady said that. I'll just send you this receipt, and once you view it, you'll get your blue. When we get your blue check marks, we'll screenshot it as a receipt.
Fantastic.
I was like, what? So I kind of had many moments like that, and then you just can't unsee it, right? And I was like, wait, I work at Facebook. I want to work at WhatsApp.
Uh-huh.
Okay? I should be able to, right? I should be able to walk into WhatsApp. What's the big deal?
And you were?
No. Huh? So no. So I went to the WhatsApp HR and I said, hey, I would like to work at WhatsApp. And they were like, we don't have any
Fantastic.
roles.
Sit down.
Yeah, they were like, we don't have any roles. And I was like, come on, you must have one role, must have something. They said, okay, we'll find out. And then they said, okay, there's actually maybe one more designer we want to hire. So we'll see. Send us your work. I said, what send us your work? They're like, no. They said you have to do a full interview. I
Oh.
said, okay.
How big was the team at WhatsApp, the design team?
4 people. So I joined as designer number 5.
That's great.
So they said, okay, fine. And they gave me 2 weeks to put together like a presentation, everything. I went for the interview and it was a fine interview, and they hated my Facebook work. Absolutely. They were like, but you know what got me the job? Is the work I had done in Evernote before I joined Facebook. So at Evernote, I had built an iOS app,
Okay.
which they thought was really well done.
Some of us still use Evernote.
Evernote then barely exists anymore. But they were like all over that. They didn't care about my Facebook work. They thought it was confusing and like bad. But they really liked the Evernote work. So they said, you know what, we'll give you a shot. I said, okay, let's see. And then I had an interview with the founders. I said, look, I really want to work here. I don't care what I do. Okay? I said, otherwise I'm going to leave and go back to Austin. I'm really not liking working at Facebook. I should not be saying that. But anyway. So I was like, I really want this job. Okay? Then I was like, okay, yeah, maybe, kind of a thing. And then I didn't hear back. After 2 weeks, I heard back. And I was literally getting ready to start thinking of moving back. And then I got a call from WhatsApp saying, yeah, we'd like for you to
Were
come
they
in.
monitoring you if you're actually moving back or just faking it?
Huh?
You think they are monitoring you that whether you're actually moving
No,
back?
they were not. They didn't care.
I mean,
like-
you were working at Facebook.
Yeah, but I tell you what, WhatsApp in those days was very exclusive.
Yeah, sure.
We had a separate badge and Facebook people were not allowed inside. It was just different. They gave me a shot and I was just over the moon. It is absolutely the best job I've had
Yeah,
ever,
that's
ever,
design
ever.
on WhatsApp. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah, and with working with the founders.
Yeah. How are they
But-
Young Home and Brian Acton?
Oh my God. So Brian Acton, a lot more reasonable. Jan, a lot more opinionated, and I really feared showing him work, and he wanted to see everything.
Oh yeah.
So
How was how was the first year at WhatsApp?
yeah, it was very interesting. 3 months and I totally regretted joining WhatsApp. I was like, why am I here? So I remember they gave me a lot of work that wasn't directly product design because I said I will do anything, and they said, okay, cool, we have this one person. Let's stick her all the marketing work and the developer sandbox and things are just sitting around and not getting done. So I did a lot of those things, and they gave me a lot of work on the app in the settings screens.
Oh,
The settings okay, we need to make this UI better.
so
it's
much to do
old.
there.
Yeah. So I did that, did a bunch of that work, and I remember my first settings thing that I worked on. 3 days I got the design done because it's used to speed from
Yeah.
Facebook. And I showed it to my manager at that time. We were 5 designers, including me, and 2 product managers. Okay. And design rolled up into product, and the head of product was my manager. And the WhatsApp product managers are very design first, so very different way of working. And I showed it to him, and he was like, "Here are 20 things you haven't thought about." And then I spent the next 3 months getting that design right, going through all kinds of imposter syndrome of like, how did I get hired? I'm going to get fired any day because I'm taking so long to do this work.
Was any
Yeah.
of the 20 things really obvious?
No,
No.
no, but it was I mean, later on, yes, once I learned how to work at WhatsApp and the detail and, the care that goes into every decision. But that's not how most companies work. So it can really spoil you.
That's interesting. So, like, at what point did you realize, okay, this is clearly something we were missing out on when we were at Facebook, in the design team, but WhatsApp tends to think of it this way. How is that difference?
Yeah, so like about 6 months in, I think, so I had no meetings. I had like one meeting a week, which was design critique.
Oh,
And I was like,
best.
what? So anyway, so I think that was the thing. But it's also how we discuss the designs
Uh-huh.
and how we ask the questions of like, what happens if this thing happens or something else happens? How will you solve it? And not having research, which means you have to really think through problems, make sure you're not creating more problems and things like that. And it's like a drug after a while. Like you're just like, oh, this is awesome because your end result ends up being so obvious, and you're like, this is such an obvious design. Why didn't I think of it at the start? And you're like, no, it's a process of like the craziness you go through before
How
you.
many iterations does it typically take?
It depends. It's like the one of the things I worked on, which was group join permissions. Okay, was about 120 iterations.
Wow.
Yeah. And the thing is, when we went to design critique, it was always like, if you're not ready for the critique, don't show it. Show it when you're ready. It means there were no deadlines at WhatsApp. That's why you see that WhatsApp is so slow with its rollout.
What does being ready means?
Being ready means when you're ready to have a discussion for a design critique, not
Have
just
an
because, yeah, when you actually feel like, okay, this is at a point where I can take feedback now, you know?
So you better have answers, basically. Give me pretty.
Sort of, but the thing is, you will never be done with one design critique. You would like, on an average, go through 3 to 4 design critiques till you get to a final solution.
WhatsApp, I mean, is notoriously slow in launching features which sometimes like seem obvious. Like there was a big gap between extending the entire emoji tray from 5 emojis when you react to a message. What is the thought process behind this gap? Like why does it take so much time?
Yeah, so that specific project was on my team. So that was more about actually speed. Like, should we just go ahead and launch with, the debate was, should we wait to have the entire thing done, which was the old WhatsApp way? Get everything right, do it once, launch it, and you're done. No A/B testing. WhatsApp still does not do A/B testing on user features, on user visible features. They do it a lot on the backend systems. But then we said, no, let's try to speed it up. Let's get reactions out fast. So what can we do to get it out fast? The file. Then the tree. Then what are the colors, skin tones. So that's how we phased it up. But on the design side, we designed everything. So we kind
Things were
of,
ready but not rolled out.
yes, but they were just rolled out as they were built.
So I assume obviously the impact for even a small change would be like massive at WhatsApp scales. Which countries were the most important back then?
India. India is the biggest WhatsApp, then Brazil.
LATAM and India. Basically.
Yeah, LATAM and India. But the way WhatsApp rolls out features, they don't do it on a country-to-country basis. It is global. Everyone gets it because WhatsApp is such an international product. Something like reactions, if I have it in India, you don't have it,
Yeah.
we cannot really communicate. Your communication breaks, right?
Yeah.
So everything is rolled out globally. The only things that are gated are things like payments and things where
That makes sense.
regulatory bound.
Do you have any insight into why WhatsApp didn't catch on in the US as much as in India?
I actually don't have a good answer to that. I think US is very like Instagram and Messenger kind of a country. And also WhatsApp in the early days was seen more for international use. And within the US, like these products were always advertised a lot, and WhatsApp like didn't really do much to market itself or promote itself. So I think there was a bit of that. Although now it's growing a lot, um, but uh, but yeah. But let me give you one quick fun fact about the timeline. So I said 2 weeks I worked on a project
Yeah.
before I left WhatsApp. I did the early designs or spec for it. I was talking to my ex-coworker a few days ago. I said, hey, so are you guys ever going to build that? Is that on ice? He said, no, we have started working on it. I was like, so when is it going to launch? He said, December 2025,
Wow. That's
which
fun.
is a very long...
Can I ask you what that feature is?
No, I can't do it. It's a big back-end change to the system, so it's taking that long. But it's a very simple, like from a user perspective, because it's so obvious why did it take you so long to launch
So
this.
how did the team grow from when you joined 5 designers to like when you left? This was like 2022,
23.
3, right? How did the team grow during that time?
So it was interesting. We were very restrained on growth early on. Like we were about 7 to 10 designers for a very long time, and then suddenly we had exponential growth. So when I left, we were about 100 designers, which is very crazy. But a lot of that,
That's pretty huge.
it's huge. A lot of that growth came from really investing in things that are more than just your basic WhatsApp today. Investing in things that are like WhatsApp business, investing in integrity features. So there are a lot of there's a lot of work that happens that none of us see on a day-to-day basis. Investing in like the API, all of those things. So we needed design support for that. At the same time, we started out an office in London.
Okay.
So the designers are kind of split between the US and London.
Okay.
So that's how the growth happened. Um,
So I'm gonna jump into some really tactical questions. How do you go about hiring designers generally? Let's start with WhatsApp. You were at a very critical role. First of all, how did that happen? That created the
role?
growth, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of it is attributed to right time, right place.
Oh yeah.
I'll just be very honest about it. I've never wanted to be a manager. I never thought about being a manager. It just so happened that we were growing and we were reporting to WhatsApp CEO. Like imagine 7 designers being managed by Will Cathcart and my skip, and I've taken a screenshot of this because it means nothing, but it's just a nice to have. My skip level manager for like 6 months was Mark Zuckerberg. It was unbelievable. Not that I talked to him all day or anything. But we just needed someone to help and start also with hiring and all of that who would do it. So it was me and this other guy, Sanat. So the two of us were like kind of tasked with it. And he was more on the payment side of things. And I was more on the consumer because I always worked on consumer. So they said, yeah, maybe you guys can like try. I said, I'm happy to try managing if you can guarantee that I can come back and become an IC if I don't like it.
They gave you 2 weeks of that in the end.
They gave me 2 weeks of that in the end after 6 years. So that's how I started becoming a manager. It was really like I had to learn a lot on the job. It was also like I had to learn how to do hiring. I didn't actually know how to do it well. And then they just told me, oh, we need to open this office in London. Why don't you like build out the London team? I was like, what? Like, how do you expect me to do it? But the thing that really helped me was I had an amazingly supportive manager who said, you know what, try it out. If you need help, we are here to help you. Just try it out. But I think that's the biggest thing. Like, you have to give people a chance to step up. And if they step up, great. If they don't, you can find an alternative. So that's how I ended up like, I used to go to London every month and a half for a whole year and a half, I think. For 4 days to build out the team, set it up, set the culture, do all those things. So set up the London team. That's how it happened. And then I just kept growing as a part of it. So I had like a bit of a rocket ship journey in that.
Right.
It was a very tough one, but it was very rewarding in terms of like a big career.
So you were hiring at various levels at that point.
Various levels, yeah. In fact, the funny thing was I was even hiring people more senior than me.
Oh,
So because I hadn't yet become
Your
that, but I
experience.
needed somebody who can actually own areas. I would actually be hiring people more senior than me who are reporting to me. So yeah, it is incredible. So and I think these sort of things happen like it is a little bit of luck, right time, right place. and all
sure.
of those
I mean, I'm
things.
pretty sure you earned that. That's fine.
Probably, but I do want to call out this other side also because like, a lot of people ask me like, how did you have this career at WhatsApp?
Yeah.
And it wasn't like a charted thing. It just, the stars started to align after a while.
It takes its time.
It takes its time. So that's how I ended up like kind of growing and becoming like director of design there.
Uh-huh.
So director is kind of a pretty high level at Meta. But the funny thing is I was so embarrassed by my title. Because
is that?
like I was saying, I was still like a designer, right? So even when I became a manager and all of that, I never changed my internal title. I overrode the internal title as product designer till the time I became a director, and then I was given an ultimatum by our head of product. She said, "I'm giving you 1 week to
To get rid
update
of the
that
imposter
title,
syndrome."
or I'm going to do it to you." So that's when I was like, finally, like it also sunk in for me finally that it's okay, just own the
Just-
fact that you are here. Yeah.
Correct. So, how do you go about hiring? Like, what do you look at when, let's say, a young designer applies at Dream11 or back then at WhatsApp? Portfolios, case studies, tests. What is generally the framework?
Yeah, I'm also a designer who
Yeah.
became a manager, not out of like wanting that, but
Uh-huh.
still see myself as a designer. I really, really value craft. Like for me, that's the baseline. The craft is not good. We are not going to have this discussion any further. So I think
What
whether
does that
you are,
mean?
so craft is just like basically high quality work, good thinking, good visual design. And of course, there's a spectrum here because if you're early in your career, you might be good at one thing and developing at the other, which is also fine.
Uh-huh.
But I think for a designer, like having good taste is really important. So I think
Interesting.
that's definitely because I'll tell you what I've seen in my career, right? It is much easier to coach on things like product thinking because every company will do their product thinking a little differently. It is very hard to develop craft. It's very hard to coach.
Is taste innate or is that something that can be learned?
I think it's a combination. Some of it is innate and some of it can be learned. Like some of the best designers I've worked with did not go to design school,
Yeah.
but they are just so good at it. I think it's a combination. I think it's a little more innate perhaps.
Yeah, it's a little unfair, but it is the way it is. I suppose.
Yeah, so when I went to college here, right, design was not a big thing. It
Yeah.
was almost like, oh, you're just studying art. Like, what are you going to do with your life anyway after this? But now I see that design is so widespread in universities. But what I'm also seeing is that there's a lot of people are teaching a lot more process than craft, which to me is like concerning a little bit.
I hear you, and it also seems like the low-hanging fruit in most design, I wouldn't say teams, but design hiring processes, and also becomes like a signal that goes to a lot of people who apply for jobs, which is why you get those dense case studies.
Yes.
Do you like dense case studies?
No. So I'll tell you how much time I spend. So to your earlier question also on like recruiting, there are two things I look at. One is how is the problem framed properly, like whatever the problem is, and what was the output, what was the outcome, what was your final solution, what did that look like, did it look good? If I check those two things, then I'll read the case study.
Right.
But if not, I don't.
You'll
do it.
scan the case study then.
Yeah, because I think what happens is that you can have all the process in the world, but your user doesn't care about the process.
Correct.
So I'm thinking about when I'm looking at case studies and things, I'm looking at it like I'm a user. So I'm like, oh, this is interesting because I think the visual design side, right, gives you a visceral reaction
Right.
of like, oh, this looks cool. It's like, why do people want to have Apple products?
Yeah.
There might be other products that are equally good, but there's something about Apple's sleekness and like the coolness that you get from it. And then you have the UX, I'm like, okay, that's like a little bit later for me. So that also has to be good. I'm not saying that should be, that if that's weak, it's okay. But the first reaction I'm going to have is to the visual sort of output of
Right.
that problem. So I think those are the things I look for. Even when I'm hiring a VP,
Uh-huh.
which we recently did, I do a portfolio round and I want to see how well the person or their team has executed. And we do an app critique round
Oh.
where we actually have them look at whatever Google Maps, Airbnb, whatever, and talk to me about the design, talk to me about the visuals, talk to me about what you would change and why.
Do you take tests like when people apply, like junior
No.
designers?
No, we used to. I stopped it at Dream 11. I think it's absolute like nonsense to do that anymore. What we do is instead we do something called a whiteboarding exercise, which a couple of designers will work with the interviewee, and they just solve a problem together on a whiteboard.
More of a collaborative exercise.
Yes, because that's just to get a sense of like, don't really care about whether it's a right or wrong answer, there isn't one. But we just want to see how are you thinking? Like, what kind of questions are you asking? So that's pretty much it. So no take-home exercises at all. I think you guys do it?
So when we hire, one of our litmus tests is basically doing something with us.
Yeah.
So what we generally do is we give them one typical task, which we give them 1 week for, and we want to work with them on it. So that allows us to understand how they are like to work in a team, how
Yeah.
they think, and what they come up with, right? So one of the most important things for us is communication because we are all remote, right? And a lot of people they just turn up with answers without like running us through why they did what.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it becomes difficult. Then we realize, okay, this is how this person is going to work in the team. And then we ask that question, like, why did you do this or that? Some of them spend like too much time doing secondary research, asking questions which are not pertinent. So we realize it's just overanalyzing stuff, right? So it gives us a good understanding of what this person is. But then, despite those mistakes, we tend to like take some people or reject some people. It goes on. Not exactly an assignment or a task because there are no real answers, but it's more of an experience of how it goes with people.
That's very interesting.
That's about it. But yeah, it's not like we can make use of their tasks.
Yeah.
That's postponed.
That's the
of the- So there's one last question I have before we can move
Yeah,
to
for
audience
sure.
questions. How does one defend design decisions in an organization? Like, how does it go about? Do you have like a rule book, like a framework? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I have a framework for that. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit. But see, I think first and foremost, we have to start seeing design as it's a creative thing, but it's also a communication tool. It's one of the best ways to communicate with your stakeholders. So one thing we have started doing at Dream 11 rather we have stopped doing at Dream 11 is writing documents or making slides and, writing pros and cons of everything. We said, no, we are going to start putting up mocks and we will discuss those mocks. Because the other thing that happens is when you discuss intellectually, like here are the things we should do, here's why we shouldn't do so and so.
Super hypothetical.
interaction. Yeah, what happens is that I might visualize it differently than you.
Right.
And then we are arguing based on our imagination.
So thinking in
Versus-
forms versus thinking in words.
Correct. So visuals react to that, can be low fidelity, high fidelity, whatever you want. So I think that is one. Second thing is I usually ask for a few things like so this is more of a framework I would say. And this is a framework we also, by the way, tell when we have people coming for interviews, we tell them when you present your case study, please present it in this form.
What
You know,
form is that?
then the form is just like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? How do you know it's a problem? How did you validate the problem? What are the solutions you explored to solve the problem? What was the final outcome
And these solutions are in a visual form.
in visual form? And why did you pick that outcome? And what was the impact? So this is like a loop. It's just completing a loop. It's very simple. There's no rocket science here.
Is it okay if people are not able to quantify the impact?
That's fine, yeah. So, but at least you know that I think you have to still have some sense of like, now if it's work in progress, I understand. But you should still have some sense of like, how did this fare for your user?
Right.
Even if it's just qualitative impact, it's perfectly fine. But I think that's where you have to draw the line between design and art, right?
Uh-huh.
Like design is still now, in the context we are speaking, it is still solving for like user needs and business problems. You're like balancing those things constantly. But as a designer, you are the voice of the user, so you tread a little more on that side. But you have to have that lens of how is this going to be for the business. And it might be like some negative numbers, but that's okay. But you should just have awareness of that. You cannot be oblivious.
But I guess in this entire framework, one of the most important bits is that if you cannot visually represent your ideas, you're not good enough as a designer.
Yeah, I think it's more than being good enough as a designer. I think you're just not leveraging your strength as a designer. Like your strength as a designer is to have more visual communication. And
You should be more comfortable doing that.
yeah, and it's a practice. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I push people on my team to do it. They get uncomfortable. I'm like, it's fine. You'll learn it. Like, you know, someday you're going to have to do it, especially if you want to grow in your career, right? Because everybody wants to grow and wants to grow very fast.
So what are some hard pills to swallow according to you for designers when it comes to craft?
Practice. See, that's the thing, right? Like design is like it's sort of an art form like dance or music. You have to keep practicing to get better. So I always think of this as like when you're early career, say yes more and upskill yourself constantly. Mid career, apply a lot of what you're learning. You know, that sort of a thing. Like keep practicing. Like I was telling you earlier,
Yeah.
that it really bothers me that I haven't used some of the newest Figma features, and I really want to like do some side project or whatever.
Honestly, auto layout gives me nightmares.
Huh?
Mansi knows. Auto layout gives me nightmares.
No, I love auto layout.
I hate auto layout.
No, it's like the best thing, yeah.
Yeah, it is.
And then I think later in your career, when you get to my stage in
Uh-huh.
your career, you have to say no a lot more.
Yeah.
You know, I still say yes a lot,
Yeah.
but that's when you know your strengths and weaknesses so well that you are more confident in like how you want to spend like the next 10 years of your.
So I guess freshers need to stop taking learnings from signals like management says no more. So I should start with saying no more when I start my career, right?
Yes.
The
No,
wrong
I,
license to
I would
learn.
say I would say you have to think of it as like upskill, practice, and then sort of dictate in a way.
Understood.
So you absolutely have to like if I look at my first 10 years of being a designer, I have just literally worked my ass off. Like I have learned all the tools. I have just because it's a just innate like interest, right?
Yeah.
Don't want to be obsolete or not know something.
Uh-huh.
You know, so like things like origami, Swift, and I didn't really need to learn it.
You got to master those tools first before you actually.
Yeah, and it's not
get
just
to it.
tools, right? It's also like understanding, like better thinking, reading good. Also, like keeping yourself inspired. That's very important. Like for me, one of the things I do every year to date is every New Year morning. I watch this video. You should all watch it. It's on YouTube. It is called Steve Jobs: The Lost Interview of 1995. It's like a 1 hour video where he talks
Oh,
about
very
craft.
slightly longish hair.
No, he didn't have the longest hair that
No?
time. I don't know, maybe he does. But it's the one when he
This
talks
much.
about craft
Yeah, yeah.
a lot. That's a really good one. And I also listened to Jan's sort of lecture at Stanford where he really attributes WhatsApp's success to right time, right place, like I was saying in
Yeah.
career. But
Cool.
Yeah.
So we do have a saying. We say this to a lot of people. Before you become a philosopher king, you got to be a king first. Right?
yeah, and honestly, I tell you what, like, if I look at my journey and I talk about luck there, I think luck favors the prepared. Like, you know, so
Yeah.
always prepare yourself, upskill yourself, because that next thing you're looking for is likely just around the corner. You don't see it, but when it comes, you'll be better prepared than everybody else
Yeah.
to take that and run with it.
That's actually absolutely true. Cool. There are a lot of questions, I'm guessing, in the audience because I heard people started discussing them already. Can we start taking them?
My name is Harshit. I'm a UX designer as of now. Before I shoot my question, thank you Canvas for making this happen. Absolutely, Priyanka, for being so warm and humble in answering all which has been really insightful for me.
Thank you.
I do have a couple of questions.
Sure, go for
The first one is, and a lot of it you have covered already, so you feel free to skip it if you think you have answered. How do you demonstrate that the design team is aligned with the company's vision and objectives? And what metrics or indicators do you use to prove that the team is on the right track?
That's a good question. So, for your first question, I think design has to be involved in coming up with the company's vision. So, if you're not involved, you have to start to get involved. So, one of the things I did when we came to Dream 11, I figured that there is a vision, everybody knows it in their head, but it's not something that is actually laid out. So, I spent some time with my counterparts in tech and product, and even Harsh, who is our CEO, to just actually put it out there, which makes a big difference. You know, it's just a way to like align everybody to the same page. So I think finding a way to understand the vision and sort of making it more clear. I think design is a really good job of this. Right? Like our job is to take complex problems and simplify them. So if you can do that even with your vision, I think that helps a lot. In terms of metrics, there's no separate metrics, I think, to track. I think it's better to have them like based on what you're working on. But what do you, like, can you clarify your question a bit more on that part?
So let's put it this way, very simply put. For example, a salesperson says, hey, you know what, I got this much of revenue and I'm contributing. Ops guy would be like, I optimize the cost by so much. Is there a metric? So basically that is how the management or the directors or
So like the value of design. is
the
what
value of design, yes. So I know a lot of it cannot be quantified,
Yeah.
but how do you make sure that people know that, hey, you know what, we are on the right track? It could be qualitative, quantifiable, I don't know. But
Yeah.
if there is any.
It's a tricky one. So one thing we've started doing we've been using more qualitative metrics for these sort of things. What we started doing at Dream11 is we've created a framework actually for our research team. It's like 5 attributes for every design that we test, and then we score it. Then that gives us a sense of like, is this design like 5 on comprehension, 3 on understanding, whatever. I don't know those off the top of my head. So that is something we use. But I don't think design can on its own push a metric. So I think it has to tether to product. So I think what we also do is we make sure that there is UX guardrails, user experience guardrails. So we are not doing things at the cost of user experience, which might give us a short blip,
Correct.
and eventually, like, the novelty effect is gone.
My next question, kind of on similar lines, is could you share what your annual OKRs, like objectives and key results, look like? And how do these align with the broader company goals and your personal aspirations as a CTO or something like that?
We
So
don't
I know
have
it's a
any.
bit repetitive, but
No, we don't have any OKRs.
all right, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think personal, like I have a lot of goals I've set for myself for things I want to do at Dream11. I have a long way to go.
All right, great. Last one,
Go for
as a chief design officer, what are the primary challenges that you would face in the following areas? Something like stakeholder management, team management, expectation management. Like just 5 minutes back, you mentioned that, hey, everyone wants to grow fast
Yeah.
and everyone is really aggressive. So just managing teams, expectations, other stakeholders from business, dev, etc. If you just throw some light on that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I'll talk about maybe 2 things. So one is it's really important for me to have a safe space with my CTO and my CPO. So even when I was interviewing at Dream11, I asked them this question because I want to be able to discuss anything with them, and push for things like redesigns and all that. Now, redesign is a very good sort of going back to your metrics question. What will this move, right? I don't know. We'll find out. But we have to take these like gut calls sometimes. And so for me, I always want to have this relationship, this triad very tight so we can discuss these things very openly and like what are the concerns. So that is like, for me, stakeholder management here starts at the top. Because what I've noticed is when this started to get strong, it permeates into the culture of the functions. The other thing I would say is your early career designers, making sure they understand what growth looks like and separating growth from promotions. Everyone who wants to grow talks about getting to the next level versus how do I become a better designer. So you have to coach them into that sort of mindset of like you're 1 year out of college. You should really next 4 years really think of like what are the things you should be doing, what kind of things you want in your portfolio, and how do we create those opportunities for you and put them in the driver's seat of their career. Because there's also this fallacy that my manager, I'm not growing because of my manager, or I'm growing because of my manager. Some of these things are partly true, but they're not like fully accurate.
Got it. Yeah, that's it from mine. Thank you so much.
Cool, of course.
Thanks, Arshit. Who's next? Shreya.
Similar question in that sense. How do you convince, because you will have to convince your management, like as a designer, I know that design has a value and you have to go with a gut. You know you're going to make a difference and it will be good for the users. But how do you convince the management or a client that what's the ROI of design essentially? How do you convince them that, you know, what we're saying is, or what we're going to build is actually going to be really beneficial for the users, the brand, the overall?
Yeah, see, that's a very difficult question to answer without context. So I don't have a lot of context working with clients, but I can tell you in terms of product. So one is how much do people understand design? That is really important. And what part of the design are they not convinced will help? So there has to be some inherent respect for the function. If that is missing, then it's a different conversation altogether. You're not there to prove every single day that design deserves its space. Yeah. So just like tech and product. I mean, I could make the same argument, right? Like, why designers can write PRDs, why do, like, what is product management? Like, can we just do with project managers and not have product managers? So I think these just become more existential discussions. But I would say, like, the design ROI is a little softer, but what has usually helped is showing people products that are good or asking them what are their favorite products, why do they like it. Oftentimes you will hear that it's cool, it's slick, it's fast, it looks nice, and then you're like, that is what design gives. It gives you the sort of a window into like actually using your the product that you're investing so much in building. If it's not inviting enough, if it's not easy to use, you know, people won't use it. Like, so those sort of things help, but they building conviction when the question is around design ka value kya hai is very hard to do. And to me, it's a huge problem that in 2024, if these sort of questions are still coming up, given that we are at the tail end
How
of the
long
app
you've been doing
innovation.
this?
Yeah, yeah.
No, but I guess Shreya and I understand. This is the client side
yeah,
problem.
yeah, that's like I don't have that exposure, so like I don't
I guess
know
I mean, it's partly because there's a spectrum of maturity that the industry is in. And especially in India, there are a lot of companies which are actually not there yet. And I do get this question. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to hijack the answer at all.
No, but you should answer.
But I do get this question a lot of times with younger designers, or for that matter, younger agencies, that how do you explain the value of design to your clients? And as you grow in an agency, as an agency as well, you start realizing that you're probably not talking to the right clients. Because the ones who actually want to invest in design, they don't even ask questions. They just go for it. Like, I get it, it's costly, go for it. I'm sure, I mean, you've seen the spectrum as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, I had to do some convincing when we decided to do the redesign. Yeah, because there was like, oh my God, what a big redesign. Like, how will this affect, blah, blah, blah. Because
Not
you have
existential
done-
though.
Not existential, but still in this case, I had to like actually talk about like the furniture example I gave you. Like how it doesn't work and why it's important to constantly like make our products stand out, and like, that we are, a lot of it is really philosophical, like we are the pioneers, we should not be falling behind, we should not be copying from our competitors, like, you know, we should be trying new things. And the question when you ask people like, what do you think is the risk? And then you give them a way to mitigate that risk. So in this case, we said, look, if we do the whole thing, we're not going to launch it to 100% on day one. We'll do it with 10%. We'll learn and keep iterating. But we have to do it. And then the other thing that helps is if you have somebody who can back you up also. So in my case, like our CEO is very design first. And he was like, yeah, we should really do it. You know, and then usually there are one or two problems that you're going to solve in the new design which had just been on the back burner, and people will be like, yeah, you're right, it also solves this other problem. But it's still, I'll tell you, even now, it's one of those things where that loop keeps opening up very regularly, and it will only close after we launch it.
One question was related to major changes that we bring in the design system. For example, we have launched our design system with suppose two modes, regular mode and a dark theme. And now there comes a requirement that, since we also have to support accessibility, we have to go for a high contrast mode. So, and this is probably going to be a major change to the design system because everything is built basis those two modes. So now how do you navigate through this? This is one. And the second correlated question is, how do you change manage all this so that it doesn't break when you are releasing it to everybody who's implementing it? It shouldn't break. So I should be able to easily move from this to the next level. So
Great, now I feel like a designer. Okay, so first of all, you should be baking in your high contrast in your dark mode and light mode. You should not be having a third system of high contrast. You have to, whenever you do design systems, you have to always check for accessibility. So I would almost suggest, I don't know how far you are in this, re-look at the colors and fonts and all of that in both your light mode and dark mode and see what adjustments you can make there. Don't create like a third thing because it won't work. Because there is no, like where will you put that? Then you have to basically turn on a mode that says show me high contrast, which is very bad experience, So I would say always bake these in. Another thing you should always do is look at your, I don't know what's your product, but you should look at it, like if it's an app or something, look at it in sunlight and see what breaks in your design system. It's very eye-opening. So I would say that is important. Change management on this stuff, so we are going through this also. We have just built out a design system. So design systems are living organisms. Yeah, you should never let a design system get in the way of your creativity. So I am also not a super strong believer in like having everything componentized. I always say your design system should have components that you're using repetitively across the app. I should not have components for everything. Okay? So some of the things has to be like custom done. But there will be a transition. Like when you're updating your design system, some screens might get it later. But what you need to do is plan out user journeys and make sure that in a user's journey, let's say just take a happy path, for example, you're not breaking the system consistency. So it's okay if there are other screens where your buttons are old, for example, or whatever. But you have to have a plan to fix it over time. So what we're doing at Dream 11 is we're basically looking at like what are some of the core flows and make sure they are getting updated faster and where we can live with inconsistency for a little time and then getting to them when we get to them. Does that help?
yes, sure. Thank you.
All right. Next.
My question is actually around imposter syndrome, and I would like to double click on your experience of facing it while you had joined WhatsApp. I just need to understand what were the strategies or what were the ideas that helped you overcome that feeling of not being worthy when you joined the team. Can
Yeah.
you share some wordings with us?
Yeah, so I used to have a career coach back then and who really helped me through this. So imposter syndrome, depending on your personality type, right? If you get it once, you're going to get it again. Like, it's always going to be with you. Like, for me, it's always there with me. Even today, on things like, as a CDO, I also work on like our investment portfolios and all that. I'm like, I don't even belong in this room. Like, I have that sort of a feeling. But I think two ways to manage imposter syndrome. One is acceptance, just knowing that you're feeling it and being okay with it. And second is using it to fuel your growth. So if you feel like an imposter, when I felt that, I knew there were people, the reason I was feeling that is because people around me are better than me. So I would like just talk to them and ask them for help, ask them for feedback, just tell them like, be honest and be vulnerable and say, I feel like I'm not doing a good job. Can you tell me what you think I'm doing well? I used to ask my manager this question a lot. I'm like, you have to just tell me one thing you think I'm doing well. From that, I went to the part that I was like, don't tell me what I'm doing well, just tell me what I'm doing wrong. But that comes after acceptance that, okay, I have this. But I would say, if you feel like you're the smartest person in the room, between that and feeling like an imposter, I'd rather feel like an imposter because I feel I like actually learn and grow a lot more. So those are the only two things, like just knowing and owning the fact that you feel that way will help you overcome it a lot faster.
Acknowledge the fact that it is imposter syndrome. You're probably not as bad as you think you are.
Exactly. You're never as good as you think you are, and you're never as bad as you think you are.
Mostly, you're always average.
Close to Fazal.
My name is Yogesh Choksey. I'm a UI UX designer in Emphasis, 11 years of experience. Also mentoring in ADP list. So when I discuss with the students, they are just want UI UX designer because it's a work from home facility. Also they got some good salary and all. So what do you suggest? Because I discussed with who has only fashion designer, architect. Okay, they want to become a UI UX designer because they get good salary. So what you say on this?
Yeah, I get these quite a bit. Like actually, oh, I should become a product designer or whatever. I'm saying great, do it, but then they have to do it on their own. Like the thing is, the salary will come after you actually upskill yourself, right? So, is there an inherent interest in upskilling themselves?
Can you give me one criteria to tell them how to they test themselves? This is a good path for your career, or it just
Yeah, there is a very simple test. Tell them to take an app they like and redesign the home screen or something
okay?
and see
Nice.
what they think about it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Anand, we'll do that first. Yeah.
So I had a question. What do you think is the major difference in learning when it comes to joining a creative studio versus a product company at different levels of your design journey? Like when you start out, or like when you're a mid designer, or when you're a senior designer, is that a conscious choice that you made of joining product versus a creative studio, and vice?
No, so I actually, my first job was at a sort of a product company. Then I did do some of the design studio gigs. I think design studios will give you a lot of variety, but they won't give you completion. So it's like a lot of it is you do the work and you hand it over, right? They won't give you that sense of follow through necessarily on how to continue to evolve the product. And a product company will give you more ownership on the end-to-end experience and also sort of, coming up with the requirements, but also then evolution of that product forward. They are not like, I wouldn't say like one is better than the other. It's just different ways of working. Now, I know people who really like the variety and would rather not work in a product company and would just do like a design studio kind of a thing. That's fine. Their career grows differently there. Whereas at a product company, if you want to be like you have like goals to be like a VP of product or like VP of design and things like that, you'll still get that at both places. But what it means at a creative studio will be different from what it means at like a product company. And I think getting that clarity is important. So for me personally, I like more being at a product company because I like to be involved from the inception to its delivery and more, which you may not get at a creative studio. But there are some studios now that do a lot of like product work, right?
In fact, at Canvas, it's a lot like the completion bit that Priyanka mentioned. We go all the way from conceptualizing features for customers to actually finally getting it to customers, revising the features. And our gigs are like around 7 to 8 years long. Like we have fewer variety problems and more monotony problems, right? So it depends on the kind of studio that you join. And honestly, the studios that actually stick around, I firmly believe, are the ones who tend to stick around with specific clients. Because you have to be there for the ground reality. You can't just say, okay, my job is done and now I'm going. So I suppose it's a choice. If you want to go to a studio, what you will get in a studio is a lot of like high throughput work. That's definitely going to happen. If you go to a place like Dream 11, you get paid a lot, I suppose. I mean, we pay as well.
Not enough apparently.
But we keep the team lean so that, we can still keep paying. Not halal. All right, who's next? Here, actually, there was one person we'll get you after that.
Person in the green.
Sorry, yeah, please go.
Yeah, hi, I'm Panas and I'm a UX writer and marketer.
Nice.
I wanted to hear about your take on UX writing as a role post like AI and Gen AI stuff. Like, is it becoming obsolete or like, what is your take on it? That's the question.
Yeah, so the UX writing role at Dream11 was under the product team, and we just brought it under design because I feel very strongly about that. I think a lot of like our education and user comprehension, UX writing is a huge supporting element to that. I don't think it's becoming obsolete at all because even if you use Gen AI and all those things, you can use that to improve your productivity, but Gen AI doesn't know your users. So our UX writing team is very involved in like user interviews. They also go to these immersion trips. They really understand the user's journey. So they actually are more like product thinkers, but their deliverable is not a design, it's the writing. So it's like nowhere near being obsolete. It's the same like we use a lot of AI in our designs also. Our illustration team does that. Not illustration, sorry, graphics team does that a lot. But what that has given them is more time and space to think about how do they level up the quality of the work. Rather than like doing a lot of grunt work themselves, they sort of delegate that to the AI. And yeah, it works. So I think Gen AI we should use more as a productivity hack.
When we lay out the strategy, the brand tone of voice, etc., and we pass it on to our clients, I have observed this that as they develop, whether it is applications or websites, as they develop, as the design evolves, a lot of times design decisions are taken where the brand's essence is lost.
Yeah.
So, being on the product side, how do you navigate through this, making sure that the brand's essence is not lost in the aesthetic?
We were just talking about this. So I think so. We are in a similar situation a little bit. I'll tell you honestly. Okay, our brand team is like, your new redesign doesn't have enough red. Because and we have spent so many years and so much money building up red as Dream11's color. So I think you have to be very clear and like, how do you want the brand to represent itself in the product? It's not always about plastering the same thing across, right? So the way we are doing it is we're saying, no, we will use a lot more red in as an accent color. And for any of our promotional things in the product, we'll emphasize more on the red. Still, the brand team is not very comfortable with it. They're like, no, but you had a red header, now you don't have a red header. Like, no, it doesn't matter. So I think it really comes down to having a very judicious approach to like, how does your brand travel through all your products, like whether it is your ads, whether it is your marketing pieces, your graphics, your illustration, whatever it is. And there has to be this, it's like a long tail effect of sorts, rather than the prominent effect. Your prominent effect should still be in your media and those sort of things. But overall then, how is your long tail, sort of your brand traveling? That's really important. So, it should not be lost, I feel, in product, but it doesn't need to be front and center. So I think that is the tension and the thing that needs to be debated
I
often.
think also just to add to your point, I'm not sure at your workplace, but a lot of brand teams tend to forget that the product also exists as a part of the brand. Like customer experience is a lot of different things, not just the product, right? And unfortunately, a lot of rebranding exercises don't take into account interface design, right? Like we see a lot of times there is a lot of rebranding happening which is actually print friendly, not digital friendly. So I feel that probably the dialogue should be less blaming and more of like a handshake that a rebranding is happening. How do interfaces look if the rebranding is this versus that, right? Because then you start with a particular truth, right? This is where it's gonna go, right? At that point of time, the interface design team actually tells you that, yeah, if you have this kind of a brand, your interfaces will potentially look like this. And there's no surprise down the line.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think even at Dream11, we are like trying to do a better job of making sure brand and product talk to each other a little bit more. Because I think that's generally an issue. Like, I mean, it's on both sides, by the way. Product also won't talk to brand also won't talk to products.
Absolutely. Cool. Thank you for your question. We'll move to one last question.
So I'm Tejas, I'm UX designer. So it's just a question out of my curiosity, like and if you're comfortable, then you can answer. Otherwise, it's
Sure,
fine.
sure. Absolutely.
So nowadays we all can see that WhatsApp is throwing much updates. Like in every 10 days there are new updates. And recently I had a call with my mom, video call, and I had to told my mom that mom, the switch camera button has moved to some other place. And I noticed one thing, like usually when we put any update, the application or the website educates the users. Like there is some dialog box like
Yeah.
you have to your journey is this. Click here, then you will get this feature. But WhatsApp is not doing that. They are just putting very drastic feature changes. So I want to know that whether they want the reaction, they want to know how users are reacting, or they are just going crazy.
Both. Bit of both.
My
So
God.
I think there are some,
This is just-
yeah, there are some things which are a little like crazy things, but some of it is just very opinionated. So WhatsApp is a very opinionated company in the way they build products. WhatsApp does not believe in user education. The whole thing was if you have to educate a user, your feature is not ready, don't ship it. Make it simple. So WhatsApp takes risks on things like if we move certain things, will people eventually discover it? If the answer is yes, you're good to go. So WhatsApp is a weirdly design-driven company. It may not look like it from the app, like because it's not fancy, but it's super design-driven. In fact, when they hire PMs, they have to do a design round. You know, so it's like, but then also what happens is sometimes there are mandates that come from the top. Like for example, Mark Zuckerberg will say, I want all the Meta products to have this feature. Now you figure it out. But AI is a very good one. See, now they put that AI ring, right?
Yes.
And we're like, it feels little out of place in WhatsApp. But it's like, that is more of a company strategic level item and may not fit perfectly. And they'll have to iterate to make it better. But because everyone is riding the AI wave, it's more about getting it out there. So there's a shift in culture that is happening, which will reflect in your product.
I think one of the feature he was specifically also talking about was the camera flipping thing, right?
Yeah, I
that has
haven't
caught
seen
me
it.
off guard as
Yeah.
well once.
I'll have to ask John, who's the designer on that, and ask him what the heck, what happened here.
You should send that exact question. Like, is there a crazy bunch of people doing this here? Is it just me?
It is so funny that when I go to our CXO meetings, they'll all be sitting there and giving me feedback on WhatsApp needs to do this better, WhatsApp needs to change this. I'm like, you guys know I work here now, right? Like, I still get, so very funny, quick story. My husband and I don't talk on WhatsApp, we use iMessage. Because he just tells me bugs the whole time and he'll like just be like, change this design, I don't like this, this bright color looks bad or whatever. And he's an engineer, okay, but very like has good taste in design. So I told him, you know what, if we want our marriage to work, we are not chatting on WhatsApp ever.
All right, super. So that wraps it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Of course.
Alak, you were asking something. We'll wrap it with that.
Yeah. I'm also assuming there were multiple points where somebody has drastically insulted your intelligence, right? And I'm assuming that's what a lot of designers earlier on, you started at a very different phase of, not necessarily nascent, there was already a lot of interface design at that point, but your intelligence being insulted is a very common part of the early life cycle of a designer. How do you deal with that? How do you respond? Because some people get defensive, some people are combative, like me apparently. That's what my team tells me. Some people are more subversive to the entire thing. How did you overcome that? Because I feel like that's a big part of the imposter syndrome bit, right? You get your intelligence insulted in some small way, some backhanded comment or some aside. How do you address it? Do you not address it? What's the deal?
I don't address it. Like, I mean, sometimes I address it, but it's just resilience, right? I think for me, it's not been difficult because I went to a design school where one day, I've been coached to be insulted right from college. My professors have torn up my assignments and thrown it in the trash in front of me, like, you know, and saying, what is this you have done? Things like that. So you and they used to keep telling us, like, you have to build a lion's heart, whatever that meant. But I think that really prepared me for now. there were times I felt bad, but I think I'm also the kind of person, like, I see these as challenges. There's one time I was working at this design studio and I asked for a project that I wasn't prepared to work on. But they said, okay, you can try it out. And then the creative director, whoever, was like, why did you give her? He was not yelling at me, he was yelling at the person who gave me that project. It was such a passive aggressive way, right? To basically tell me that I did a shitty job. And I felt really bad about it. But the next day I was like, yeah, cool, I'll learn this shit and show him. Like, it's generally like that is how I am. So I've not had a lot of issues with these sort of backhanded comments and. But yeah, I decide where I really want to step up and where I want to ignore. So one thing I will say, as you become more senior also in your career, you get these a lot more because the expectations from you also go up so much that they feel like, what do you mean you can't do this? So yeah. I don't know if that's like a satisfactory answer for you.
Not at all. But anyway,
Not at all.
on that note, we will close this up. Thank you so much, guys, for that.
All right.
That
Yeah,
was-
thank you everyone. It
Yeah.
was really great to see you.